morning, everybody. My name is Josh Harnagel, and first off, thank you, General Owens. Thank you to the Lone Star Museum. It's a pleasure to be here, and it is so nice to be home. So nice to be near home. So my chat this morning is something we've done for the last 4 years. We're going to talk a little bit about a survey we run every January that polls the flight training industry, and not just a segment of it, but the entire industry. So we talk to flight school owners and operators, flight instructors, independent flight instructors that aren't associated with flight school, students, pilots, prospective students, and we get a sort of a snapshot of where the industry is and what we've done over the past year and what we're looking forward to doing over the coming year. Before I dive into it, I have a quick story. I very recently had to take a CFI reinstatement ride for the second time. Apparently, I really love pain and hate refresher clinics. But I went down to my friendly local DPE, Roger Sharp, who you all will hear from later, and I took my ride, and I thankfully passed. And then he said, "Do you want some feedback?" Yeah, I'll take feedback. He said, "Well, you talk too much, and you don't get to the point. And when you're with a learner, you really got to give them the point right away, beat them over the head with it, make sure they understand the core of what you're trying to get across." So, in Roger's credit, you only have to pay attention for the next minute or so. It'll cover the point. So, the state of flight training this year has been customer numbers are up, revenue is up, costs are up, not so great, but prices are also up. So, generally speaking, the state of flight training is great. These are the good old days. At some point, hopefully many years from now, we will look back and go, man, we had it good in 2023 and 2024. So congratulations, you finished the presentation. No. All right, so now y'all can tuck into your coffees and listen to me drone on about some data analysis, but that's the high level stuff. So when we look at the survey responses this year, we ended up with a nice little boost, thanks mostly to AOPA and Flying Magazine for their promotion of it and their support. So we got a really good representative sample across the board. So just a couple of terms to introduce very quickly. FTO, Flight Training Organization, those are organized flight training operations. So a flight school, university, or any program where one of their core purposes is delivering flight training. Those organizations are represented in this survey by both a manager, who's really asking a lot of business type questions, and then instructors, which are the line instructors that deliver the training themselves. And then we have our pilots, our active pilots, lapsed pilots, active students, lapsed students. We have prospective students, and then we have what we call independent CFIs, which are the Part 61 flight instructors that are not associated with a larger flight training operation. Some of them vary. That some of them offer, primary, basic private pilot training. Others are more focused on aircraft type specific or advanced training. So if you're a BPPP instructor or something like that, and you're not associated with a flight school, you would qualify as, in this survey, an independent flight instructor. Obviously, we had great representation from the U.S. That's where A, most pilots are, B, where our reach is best, but we did get a little smattering from the rest of the country. But in general, most of this data is really focused on the U.S. So you're gonna have to excuse me because I can't see my slides. So when we look at pilots and students and what they did over the last year, it's pretty straightforward. This is pretty standard. You see, most of the hours range in that somewhere between 1 and 100. That's the bulk of the flying that they end up doing. And because in this slide we have mixed pilots and students together, 70% of our population received flight training of some kind. I think it's 70, yeah. I have to see how good my memory is as I go through this. And we had, the last column on that main chart there is, I believe it's ground training. So the definition of ground training in this survey is it's actually a combination of fast team webinars, or seminars, anything that is an organized training event or a wings program, an online wings program or pilot proficiency center at EAA. And it's actually a very high participation rate in that sort of formal ground training, which I think is an excellent sign. On the left-hand side of the slide, this is their ratings of all of their flight training experience that they received last year. And we kind of break it down by overall instructor and school. And this is very consistent year to year. Generally speaking, people enjoy their flight training, both pilots and students. And universally, they like their flight instructors, and they don't really like their flight schools all that much. For somebody to rate a flight school as a 3, when you talk about a 1 to 5 ranking, a 3 was what I would consider a detractor, somebody who is not very pleased. People generally go a little bit higher than what they actually experienced. And so to have that number drop below 4 means there were some folks that were not pleased with their flight school. I think this is just kind of human nature, though. They interact with the person, they build a relationship with an instructor, and the flight school is this amorphous corporate America thing. And anytime there's an issue, it's the flight school's fault. It's not the instructor's fault. So kind of expected, but it's an interesting data point. When we look at active pilots, this is where we break down how many hours they indicate that they've flown. I do love the couple of people that self-identified as an active pilot and said they have not flown any in 2023. Those are a survey giver's favorite sorts of people. They skew data, but what you're going to do, you can't force people to vote a certain way. But when we look in this active pilot, so the definition of active pilot on the survey is somebody that is actively engaged in flying on a regular basis, not trying to get back into it, not a rusty pilot, not a lapsed pilot, but actively flying. And these folks are doing training. We're roughly 50% of them got a flight review last year, which is a great number. That's the number we'd like to see, right? And then I think it's about 25% did an IPC. Now this mixes both instrument rated and private pilot students together. So about somewhere between 40%, around 40% of our respondents were instrument rated. So that number makes some sense as well. And again, I pulled out the wing or the FAST team seminars and webinars because honestly, that's a very high participation rate in a non-flying activity program. And so I think there's value in those webinars and those seminars in reaching that active pilot population with safety messages and et cetera. When we look at our students, our students we don't get any airline pilots in this category. Sometimes we get airline pilots in this category, and they can push those hours log number up quite a bit. So in the students, they top out at, there's very few students that are flying 300 hours a year. Most of them are in that 50, 100 hour a year number. And generally speaking, this is an interesting little comparison. So the majority, 80 some odd % of students will train at a single FBO, a single flight school, but the majority of them will train with more than one primary instructor over the course of the year. And it's specifically worded, so it doesn't, hopefully if they read the directions, it doesn't mean check airman, it means primary, who is in charge of my training today, instructors. So this is maybe partly due to people moving through the program, and if they get into the commercial or the CFI, there's different instructors who do that. But this is also reflective of turnover in the instructor pool. People leaving and going into the airlines and students being turned over. So interestingly, students might not like their flight school, but they don't move. That could be limited options. It could be they have money on account, whatever, but they're pretty sticky. In a regular business, out in the real world business, if you saw a customer satisfaction in the roughly 65%, but 80 some odd percent of your customers stay with you for a year, that would be interesting. I'd want to know why that business is able to do so in the perception of the customer poorly and still retain their business. But again, they don't blame the instructors for anything. And then 57% are on the pro pilot track. This number is a little higher for us. Our audience tends to skew a little more GA, but you can definitely see that professional pilot pipeline is full and blooming. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means around FTO size and capabilities. So if we look at flight training providers, so this slide is a combination of FTOs and independent CFIs. And we start to see a huge dispersion of results here. So the FTOs, the flight schools, generally speaking, had a great year. If we look at their busyness, most of them are busy. A lot of them have a wait list. And basically none of them are empty. When we go to the independent CFIs, that is not the case. It skews far more towards not very busy, not hardly flying, and moderately flying. And this is like the way this question is asked is it's purposely asked in a way that is based on that person, the respondent's view of how busy they were. It's not a quantifiable measure. It's not like we say, independent CFI should do 50 students a year or whatever. This is, if they select I'm hardly flying or I'm not very busy, that means relative to what they would like to be, generally speaking. So the independent CFIs are not getting the student load that they would like to see, and that's also reflected in their ratings. So the top on the left-hand side of the slide, there are business outcome ratings. So this is generally, the question is, how did last year go for you from a business perspective? The flight schools, really well. The independents, not so well. And then we ask, how do you anticipate next year going? And we pretty much always see people are optimistic, so that number is always a little bit higher. But this year it's actually not as high as it usually is. Usually it's 2 or 3, like 3/10 higher. Most people, if they say I did a 4 this year, I'm expecting to do a 4.3 next year. So it's actually kind of an interesting note that those numbers are so close together. All right, so as we start talking about these FTOs, this year what I did was we categorize them by size of their training aircraft fleet. So how many 172s or Archers or whatever they use as their primary training fleet. If they're less than 10 in that fleet, they're a small FTO. Between 10 and 20, they're a mid-size FTO, and above 20, they're a large FTO. And I think sometimes it's useful from a benchmarking perspective. If you think about your operation, where would I fit in that, to sort of look at what the median values are of all the small FTOs, all the medium FTOs, and all the large FTOs. Obviously, you can see the numbers, and the profit margin is a little bit of windage. I added a profit margin question this year, and thanks, Charlie. It's not the best gauge, but it might be a little helpful and give us some idea. I think. Thank you, Charlie. I think a lot of people will probably bump that to more like what they'd like it to be. But generally speaking, most of the flight schools are reporting that they are profitable somewhere in that 10 to 20% band. And the larger the FTO, the more likely they are to be reporting a higher profit percentage. The real key thing that I'm personally pulling out of this, and this is a little bit of a hypothesis, is that as you get larger as a flight training organization, the ratio between airplanes and simulators, if you add them together, and instructors starts to go up. So what that means is that these larger FTOs are utilizing their resources more efficiently than the smaller FTOs. An airplane can fly, you're flying around the clock and you do quick turns and quick refuels, but probably somewhere between 18 and 20 hours a day, right? Probably more reasonably 16 hours a day. A flight sim can fly 24 hours a day. An instructor can instruct 8 hours a day. So if your schedule is booked, you need more instructors than you need airplanes. And so that one of the measures, just kind of a rule of thumb that I've sort of developed over the years looking at this data, is the ratio between the number of instructors they have and the number of the platforms they have is a good measure of their resource utilization, because you would not add instructors if you have airplanes sitting empty and you have no demand for it. Now let's talk a little bit about what these FTOs have planned and what they accomplished. So in 2023, the vast majority of them increased CFI headcount. They added a CFI, not to replace the leaving one, but to increase the number that they have available. Almost 50% indicated that they acquired a new aircraft for their line. So that doesn't necessarily mean purchase. That could be a lease back or something like that. But 50% had indicated they added an aircraft. 15% a simulator. We'd like to see that number up a little bit. So, help us out, guys. And 24%, about a quarter, made a purchase, a major purchase that was not an aircraft or a simulator. And this is the painful number. This is software or computers or, accounting services. Who knows what it is? It's a bucket category for the painful, generally speaking, non-revenue driving expenses. As far as what they have planned for next year, most of the categories are a little bit down. Roughly 55% plan to add an airplane, but 25% want to add a simulator, so that's good news. And then everyone's optimistic, so they always expect to do less major purchases than they have historically done. Usually it runs in the 20 to 25% a year range. Operationally, most flight schools are still charging by the hour. But we are seeing that number come down, where there are flight schools and flight training organizations that are offering either a bundled package where maybe ground school, simulator time, and the course kit is all bundled into a flat fee, and you can pay a little bit less per hour on the aircraft if you commit some upfront fee to that. And so we are starting to see that as a trend that's developing. And there are some of the larger schools, you all are probably aware of the ones in particular, that just charge flat fees across the board, and there's not a per hourly charge on them. 43% of this sample are 141 schools, and interestingly, 58% of the people that indicated that they have a management responsibility at their flight school also provide instruction or evaluation services. So there's roughly 40% of the business of the flight schools out there that have a full-time manager associated with them. Most of these flight schools, even some of the really large ones, tend to be owner-operator run. And that owner-operator is a CFI, serves as a chief flight instructor or something like that. In the Part 141 environment, where you have to have a designated chief flight instructor who has some regulatory responsibilities, it can be risky to give that role to somebody who is not an owner or committed long-term to the business. And so I think you start that, just the way that's structured, you see some more owner involvement on the training side, and potentially that might be a little distraction from the management of the business as well. All right, so in terms of challenges, things that were difficult, we also start to see some diversions here between our independents and our FTOs. The FTOs are really concerned about cost, aircraft, insurance, maintenance, and so this maintenance is both availability and cost of aircraft maintenance, cost of parts. That is, by the way, a huge issue that is coming. If you run a flight school, you are probably aware of it. I think Bob Heppa will be doing a breakout session on that, and I encourage you to attend it, because that is an area that needs some focus from an industry. If we don't have airplanes to fly, eventually we're just going to go out of business. So both the independents and the CFIs or the FTOs have issues with pilot examiners, and we'll look at their data in a little bit. And then, interestingly, I think both of them, this is the first time general economic uncertainty has crept up into the top 5 since the 2020, since the first report, and it's equal on both of them. And this is like a survey giver's kind of honeypot question, because it doesn't mean anything, right? Cost of aircraft insurance has a meaning. General economic uncertainty is, I'm anxious about the world. right? Because that could mean I'm worried about politics. That could mean I'm worried about interest rates. That could mean I'm worried about Armageddon and who knows what. And so there is a underlying boiling level, sort of slowly simmering level of anxiety in the industry on both sides of the training providers, which I think is interesting to note at least. All right, so let's talk about DPEs. We got, in terms of raw numbers, it wasn't that many, but in terms of population size, I think we ended up getting close to 10% of the DPEs that are out there responded. So I think it's a fairly good, maybe 8%, it's a fairly good sample size. About half of them, a little less than half, 40%, are on a wait list, and all of them are very busy. If you can find these couple that indicated that they were not very busy or hardly flying, good for you. Because those, I know DP scheduling it can be a major issue for training providers. And again, our people they self-identify whether they're a full-time or a part-time DPE. So these median numbers of applicants per year may be a little skewed. Some of the folks that said they were a part-time DPE indicated that they gave enough check rides that they were flying like every day. So I don't know how part-time they really were, but all the full-time, generally speaking, all the full-time DPEs are doing over 200 check rides a year, which means probably 2 a day on most days when the weather is good. They are extremely busy and they're feeling it. We're going to come back to some check ride data that we got, which might be a little interesting on that as well. But for now, we'll talk about costs. Costs are going up. The next couple slides will really show that. But our average hourly rental rate for a training aircraft is $175, $220 for an advanced aircraft. Again, that is up to the respondent's interpretation a little bit. And then $380-ish for a twin. And we asked them to provide the wet rate without an instructor. So you would add an instructor onto this as well. On the sims, they're 50 and 80 respectively for a BATD, and an FTD is roughly 80 as well, about the same price as an AATD. I'll just throw this little asterisk out there. Those numbers don't go up very much. The airplane numbers go up. The sim numbers generally don't go up in terms of retail rates. There is, as expected, a little price increase for flying with a check airman or a chief CFI over a line CFI, but our average rate for a line CFI is $65 an hour. All right, so across the course of, if you were on a professional pilot track, this is what this is meant to look like. The bars are median cost, so some are lower, some are higher. This is roughly median. I don't use average for these cost numbers because sometimes there are some costs in there that will really skew it. So I think these are roughly, they feel about right, about $14,000 for a private pilot certificate and $12,000 for an instrument. Once you get past the private and instrument, there's a lot of variability depending on program type. There's a lot of people that do the multi-commercial as the first one. There's just some variability, and time building is not included in some prices and it is in others. But what is interesting is the median reach to complete seems to be, we'll talk about it seems to be going down across the courses. That people are getting done a little bit faster. It's costing them a lot more, but they're getting done a little bit faster. And we'll talk some more about that in a second. I have a hypothesis. But what is for sure is that the costs are not going to go down. 70% of FTOs indicated they raised prices in the last 12 months. 45% indicate they are intending to raise prices. And 27% have said they raised prices in the last 12 months and they plan to raise prices in the next 12 months. Now, these the 70 and the 45 are not mutually exclusive of the 27, right? So I know the numbers don't add up to 100, but that 27% is reflected in both the have raised and will raise price. Only 14% indicate that they will not raise prices either in the future or and they have not raised prices in the past. So inflation is probably here to stay in terms of cost of training, and I would expect to see it a little bit higher next year too. So let's talk about check rides. So this is self-reported, our first time check ride pass rate. So our FTOs, the managers of the flight schools, indicate they get an 85% pass rate. their CFIs, and this includes both the flight school CFIs and the independent CFIs. Say it's 77, and the DPEs say it's 78%. I think there's maybe a little ego on those flight school managers, but that's common. That's human nature. This is a very sad slide for me personally. This is the DPE's rating of applicants today versus 5 years ago. Totally subjective, but only 5% say that the applicants today are better than they were 5 years ago. About a third say they're the same, and over 60% say that they're either worse or much worse. So that's an issue. There's definitely, at least from the DPE's perspective, a strong decrease in the quality of applicants. And I'll say anecdotally, talking to examiners, they confirm that for the most part. And especially, we'll talk about the reasons in a second, but especially initial CFI candidates. There's a lot, like every DPE I've talked to recently about that does initial CFI rides complains about those candidates in particular. Okay, so primary reasons for check ride failure. This is a ranking from 1 to 5 again, where they stack order them. So these are big, broad buckets, but the clear winner is basic piloting skills. We have the training oversight category is really like, well, my instructor never taught me how to do stalls, which happens, plenty. But this is not really the pilot's fault, right? This is more the instructor. There's a lack of clarity in the syllabus or whatever, and something was missed during the training. When you read the comments from this part of the survey, this piloting skills bucket is really things like crosswind landings, turns around a point, staying coordinated in steep turns, and basic how to fly an airplane safely stuff that is failing people. There's not much complaining, or at least there's not much focus, I guess, on knowledge. I don't know how many people fail a private pilot check ride because they don't know the cloud clearances in Class Bravo, but it's probably very few. They're more likely to fail it because they don't know how to land the airplane in a crosswind. And so this is an interesting slide too. So this is all the different categories: managers, CFIs, pilots, students, all that. And a stack order ranking 1 to 5 of what are the primary factors in a student or learner's or that pilot's success in flight training. And everybody says it is the preparation that the learner puts into the training. So everybody from the flight school owner to the instructor, to the DPE, to the students themselves puts the onus on the student, on the learner. But we really don't want to say that people can't fly, that there's a natural ability. Like that question is in there just to see if people will actually click it. And most of the time, we are very hesitant as an industry to say that that the learner's natural ability to control the aircraft is a factor that's usually ranked either last or second to last. And then instructor prep and instructor ability tend to be tied. There's a little bit of a change there. The FTO managers in particular think the instructor's natural ability is less important because they probably think that they have good standardization and process and all that, and they can take a raw instructor and turn them into an effective one. And then on the end is the role of the flight school. How important in flight training and the student success is the flight school itself, its management, its process, and everybody thinks it's not very important. The FTO managers think it's more important than anybody else does. Again, it's their job. But pretty much across the board, people think the onus is mostly on the learner, a little bit on the CFI, and it's not so much on the flight school, which is interesting. I don't know that I can draw any conclusions from that, but it is an interesting data point. This is another side slide. Okay, did your CFI use the syllabus during your training? 40%, 38% said yeah, and I was given a copy. Excellent, 100%, good job. 17% said yes, but I was not given a copy. Okay, but maybe we should probably give them a copy. And then 30, a full third say that no, my CFI did not use a syllabus. And then there's 13% that say, I'm not sure. I count that as no. Right? Like if your CFI is using a syllabus, you should know that. It should be plainly obvious. They should pull it out and look at it. So when we go back to why are people failing check rides, it's because they don't know how to land an airplane. I think there may be some correlation there. Okay, so notable trends, things that we're noticing that are happening in the industry right now. The first one, training costs are up year over year. So this is all 4 years of the survey, the median cost by course, and we go from a private pilot being 9,000 to up to 14,000 this year. So over a 50% increase in cost over 4 years. So as we know, the flight school's cost has gone up, and that gets reflected in the retail costs to the learner, to the student. But interestingly, training time is down, and down enough that I don't think it's just an error. I think, or like a statistical anomaly. Across all the courses, the median number of weeks, so calendar weeks to completion, has dropped off, and dropped off pretty consistently across all the courses. I have a hypothesis, and it is, So training costs are up. They keep going up. Training time going down by course level, year over year. And my hypothesis as to why that training time is going down is that bigger is better in flight training. The bigger the flight school, the better their rating, their self-rating of their business outcomes. And generally speaking, those flight schools, have professional pilot track learners who are more committed, at least time-wise, to flight training. They probably have better processes. They might have on-site maintenance, so aircraft scheduling is less of an issue. There really are economies of scale as you get larger in these organizations that really start to impact the quality of training, that, or at least the availability of training, let's call it that. Maybe not quality, but availability of training for a customer becomes better as the school gets bigger. So when we, 2020 was a rough year, especially for the independents. So that number is a little bit low, and it's come up, but it's not increasing really. It's staying right at that 3.2 range. But for our mid-size FTOs are the ones that have actually gotten the biggest boost. They went from rating like a 3.5, about the same as a small flight school, a small FTO, to now being competitive with the largest FTOs. And I'll say again, on a ranking scale, a 4.8 is an extremely high score. So the large FTOs had an excellent year in 2022. That means the vast majority of them clicked 5 when they said, how was this year? Perfect. Better than I could have expected, 5. Now, instructors, this is my personal favorite slide, personal pet peeve. This is the perception of the value of simulator training in private pilot curriculum, by type of person over the course of the year. So any of the CFIs, any of the flight school managers, CFIs, DPEs generally value the simulator low in private pilot training, and somewhere around a 3, maybe a little bit less than a 3, which again would mean very not valuable. Compare it on that scale. But the students think it's great. And this year I actually asked this question to the prospective students, the people who have not started, and they rank the value of simulation and private pilot training at 4.3. So if you're a flight school and you have people coming in off the street, when they come in the door, they are more likely, probably very likely, to value simulator training and be open to it. And I think this is an important thing that sometimes gets lost when we're all in the flight school and we're focused on flight training. Our customers do not sign up for flight training to do flight training. They sign up for flight training to get a certificate or a career or to get out of flight training. The goal is not to fly around in a pattern in a 172 with a CFI. The goal is to get that certificate and to move on. And they view the simulator as a tool to do that, sort of naturally, because of the culture of airline pilot training, et cetera. So I don't think it's a valid excuse for a CFI to say, we just got in the airplane because that's what the student wanted to do. I don't know about that. I think that's what you wanted to do. But this is a consistent trend, and I will point out one highlight, though. The numbers across the board are going up. So even for the flight school managers, the CFIs, and the DPEs, they are, over the course of the last 4 years, starting to value that simulator training and private pilot curriculums a little bit higher. So I don't want to delay our next speaker very much, but I will be available for the rest of the conference. If you have any questions, you should get this report, actually the full report, which has a little more information in it, emailed to you hopefully before lunch today, and it'll be available on our website to download as well.